And now, two guys who survived the first Red Dawn movie, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 92 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, some long overdue housekeeping and announcements, and prepping for winter. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. First, two quick things. Jonathan's going to be out today. His laptop, unfortunately, got stolen from his hotel room while he was visiting some family, so he's not going to be able to join us. And I really hope everyone had a really great Thanksgiving. And for our international listeners, I hope you had a really great last couple of weeks while we were gone. To move on to the bulk of the housekeeping, I know, and because I have a tendency to do this sometimes, which is to fast forward through the housekeeping portions of podcasts. And that's certainly you're right, but we've got some stuff that I really want to share with you and a special announcement about the future of In the Rabbit Hole that actually will affect you. And so let's dive into the first thing, which is Scout would like to invite everyone to the last Appleseed of 2012 in Texas. That's not the last Appleseed of all time, but it's the last one in Texas for 2012. They'll be doing the normal 25-meter work and known distance work at 100, 200, 300, and 400 meters. If you bring your centerfire rifle, of course. And I'm also going to post Scout's full message in today's show notes. If you want to go read about it and see the link and go join up and all that fun stuff, it'll be easy for you to do. And got some listener contributions that have been sent in to us. And the first one is a correction to a show we did where I was making fun of California's gun laws. And it was sent in to us by Logic Bob, and he posted it on the forum. And let's see, it just says, I wanted to correct the record and provide some insight regarding concealed carry permits in California. And I'm going to put a link to this also because his post was longer than what I'm going to share, but I'm going to share the highlights to correct what I said. And he goes on to say, fortunately, once you get a permit here, it is good throughout every county in the state. That largely corrects what I said. And the vast majority of counties in California are at least may-issue states. May-issue meaning we must show good cause along with passing a background check and oftentimes an interview. And it says, see the map below. He really went way above board here and even posted a really great map on the forum detailing out the areas that he was referring to. Let's see. Also, once we Californians obtain a permit, we actually have it pretty good in terms of restrictions when compared to some states where it's easier to obtain the permit, such as Nevada and even Texas, which I did not know. This is probably because the People's Republic never intended so many of us to actually obtain a permit, which that's good to hear. And as a side note, Logic Bob, I'll get with you, but hopefully if you're in the area where I have to go to in California, maybe we can meet up and have a beer or something. And let's see, it goes on from there. California has some terrible laws on the books, and we still have a lot of room for improvement in regards to gun rights. But there are a lot of exaggerations and falsehoods out there too, especially in other states. I can definitely identify that with that because I know when I go out to California, everyone wants to ask me if I have an oil derrick in my backyard since I'm from Texas, or if I ride a horse to and from work. And while I don't think I'd really enjoy an oil derrick in my backyard, riding a horse to and from work would be pretty awesome. But no, I do not have a horse in my backyard or anywhere else for that matter. And again, but I would actually really like one. Maybe a pony. Nah, not a pony. A real size horse. So let's see. We've got one more, which comes to us from Howard. And this one is a really special one. And it's near and dear to all of our hearts because it addresses something we've been joking about for a very long time, which is The Myth of the Roving Hordes. I'm going to read it to you. I'm probably not going to do that great a job because as it printed out in very small type. And while I have excellent eyesight, it printed out in really small type for some reason. So here goes. I believe you are among the best, most highly informed, and rational preppers in the modern world. Thank you, sir. And let that be a lesson to everyone. That is a fantastic way to start off an email, especially when you're about to tell somebody they're wrong. The comment always precedes an exception, doesn't it? In an ancient podcast, you are attempting to put to rest the roving horde myth that hinges so much survival fiction with righteous violence. You asked for documented examples of any time that something like this has happened in history. I think that perhaps I have found one. While this cannot be considered proof that the roving horde is right around the corner waiting to kill you and eat your remains, I do believe it is not an impossible scenario. In the time of Shaka, the king of the Zulu nation, an interesting set of circumstances occurred. Shaka went to war with multiple surrounding nations, and as the defeated tribes fled into neighboring nations, there was a simultaneous crop failure due to drought. These displaced hungry people became the basis for the horde that we have been looking for. Since they could not find enough food in an area to support themselves, and they were always surrounded by enemies, their only option was to keep moving, essentially going on a rape and pillage tour of South Africa. Very funny way of putting that. This only stopped when the rains returned and the total number of people in the mob fell to a sustainable level. For a longer reference to this, you can look it up in a book called The Blooding of the Spears. It covers the evolution of the Zulu nation up to the Battle of Rorke's Drift, including the Battle of Iswanda, I think I said that correctly, where they wiped out the English in a huge slaughter. The displacement of the tribes in South Africa is called, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this correctly, it's the Mafcane? You get the idea. And then he goes on to give me the Wikipedia link and some other interesting information. It also goes on to say, I would also like to consider political and military hordes such as Sherman's March to the Sea during the Civil War as possible examples. Whatever Titawaki scenario you choose, it will certainly be politically unstable, and various military campaigns against other armies or civilians cannot be ruled out. Gentlemen, please keep doing what you're doing so very well. I appreciate all the hard work and efforts in this important and, dare I say, entertaining enterprise. Well, thank you, Howard, for the kind words and actually for the correction. And I'm not going to disagree with you, but in large part, our theory still holds that maybe we haven't made it absolutely clear that we don't think the roving hordes are impossible, but it's more about what gets portrayed in survival fiction. And obviously that is largely for impact and entertainment value, what's portrayed in the different survival book or survival fiction books. But, and as you pointed out, these are very rare instances. And I don't think anybody's ever really, at least never on our forum or let's say the survival podcasts forum or some of the more reasonable areas of the prepper community, that this has not been a major concern. Part of it is just it always annoyed me. The way these things were portrayed in the books were never portrayed in what could be considered an accurate way or in a logical way. On the surface, they seemed logical, but when you dug down into them, it kind of really starts to fall apart. That doesn't diminish what you've said, and it's not that I disagree with you, because I do definitely think, and as you rightly pointed out, there are instances where a roving horde type situation can take place. Thank you again, Howard. I actually really appreciate that, and your email was really quite entertaining. And if anybody else comes across any other historic examples of roving hordes or anything similar to roving hordes, don't be shy. Send it in using the contact form, and yours will most likely get read to, since it has become such a large part of the show. And now for the ITRH news. First, I want to thank each and every one of you that listen to this podcast. Email in with information, and especially those that have become part of the forum. And I'm going to do something very unusual in the podcasting world. I'm going to thank everyone that sends in corrections, either by email or by posting them on the forum. We really do actually appreciate that. And I want to add this in quickly on that last part. Some people have mentioned that they've gotten roasted for sharing corrections with other sites and podcast hosts. And I'll admit that sometimes it pisses me off too. You put in all this hard work and you're pouring your heart and soul into something, and then typically the kind of messages that you get, I now know from experience, don't start off and in as nice a way as Howard's email, where it's like, hey, thanks, and acknowledging that this person does a lot of work. Usually they just start off with, you said this, you did this, you had a typo here, and the impression is they're saying you suck. For the most part, I actually know that when I get those emails, and even though my initial reaction is to sometimes get pissed, Howard, I didn't get pissed at you. I actually really liked your email. But it's easy to take it personally and to feel unappreciated. It's very easy. And I think that's actually probably why most podcast hosts, whether in our own community or not, tend to kind of snap out about stuff like that. And the habit you have to take, and this habit does actually translate into the next thing, but the habit you have to take with all things like this, criticism of any kind, is to take a step back and appreciate that the other person on the other side of the phone, or if they're standing in front of you, or if it's the person on the other side of the keyboard, that they really did take the time to start a correspondence, and they really are trying to be of help. And so I think that really applies to most things in life. Criticism is often given in a crappy way, but sometimes you have to take a step back and really think about why the person's doing it and what their real message is. And as far as rabbit hole goes, no one should ever be afraid to email us or post on the forum. As long as it's polite, please keep it polite. If something that's wrong, or if there is actually a typo, and funny enough, somebody actually did comment on one of the more recent posts on the forum that there was a typo, and I quickly went on and thanked them. But that's kind of the way you have to go about life in general. You really, sometimes you got to stop, take a look back, set aside your own feelings of unappreciation or being guarded or something like that, and really take to heart what the person's saying. Sometimes they may be completely full of crap, but often they're actually doing you a favor. So, and disclosing the future of ITRH with you. Yes, I'm delaying this a little bit to mess with you. I have some good news and I have some bad news. The bad news is, as Jonathan so eloquently put one time, we're all Superman till we're not. And I've recently been informed that I am not, in fact, Superman. I know. Shocking. Shocking. It would seem I've metaphorically let a bus dangle over a cliff, as long as we're using the Superman metaphor. This is another lesson in survival chi. And yes, this is going to be a little bit about my personal life, but it affects the show. What I'm going to share with you changes things, and what I don't want to do is just change things and not respect the time you've invested listening to the show and participating in ITRH. I believe podcasts and blogs are a two-way street. We invest our times to put out a podcast that's free and to put out blog articles that are free. And the hope is that people will take from them, enjoy them, and in some instances, people turn their podcasts into businesses and they gain financially from them, and I think that's awesome. You, in turn, as a listener, invest your time to listen, participate, and then tell other people about the show that you like, whether it's this one or whatever blog or podcast it is that you like. So recently, I was abruptly informed that I've put my long-term girlfriend at the bottom of my priority list for the last couple of years. You know what? After I stepped back and looked at things from her perspective, I totally got what she was saying. And she was right. But it also made me realize that there's several things in my life that aren't getting the attention they deserve. So after the fur finished flying and she and I both settled down, and I really sat down and put everything, all of my areas of responsibility on paper. And I've made some tough choices about what to cut. And the show and the super secret In the Rabbit Hole survival gear shop, only 3 people knew about until this very moment, are going to have to take a hit. But here's the good news. The show is not going away. Instead, what we're going to do is move to every other week as our schedule instead of every week. And as soon as I can figure out how to produce the show every week that's worth listening to and is the quality that y'all have come to expect, you guys are going to be the first to know. And one last quick note, since I let the cat out of the bag, the In the Rabbit Hole Survival Gear Store is not dying either. It was scheduled to make its debut February 1st. Tentatively, I've pushed that back to about 6 months from now. The idea was to pull together all of the absolute best, overbuilt, bet your life on gear all in one place and offer the customers an experience the community has never seen before. But like I said, that's not going away. That's just going to be put on hold longer than I really wanted it to happen. So now that that's all out of the way, let's do a frickin' survival show, right? A while back, we did a show called Prepper Spring Cleaning. This episode is going to be similar, but it's going to be about prepping for winter. Largely, just like that spring cleaning show was, largely on a very surface, kind of a bulleted list, very basics of what you should be doing to get ready for winter. And a lot of it is mostly reminders of things that we really should be doing anyway. But sometimes it's nice to have a friend say, hey, you might want to remember to do this. Or if you're new, great way to start a biannual habit of going through and really checking things out. So it's time to check your bags, review the items, and make sure that you really need everything in it. As our skills improve, our need for gear tends to reduce, thankfully, and there's little point in carrying more weight around than is necessary. Does your bag have seasonally appropriate clothing in it? This includes multiple layers of clothing, wool socks, a warm hat, gloves, thermal underwear, etc. Maybe even a fleece and a compression sack. Seasons do change. Weather does change. And depending on what time of year you last checked your bag, or depending on what time of year you actually built your bag in the first place, what's in there may not be seasonally appropriate anywhere. If you're somewhere that is fortunate enough to have year-round, 75-degree, beautiful, sunshiny weather, you should still go through your stuff anyway to make sure everything's in good working order and whatnot. But seasonally appropriate may not apply to you. But for the 99.99999% rest of us, even in areas where it doesn't necessarily get that cold, still time to go through and make sure what you've got in your bag is going to get you through any issues that could arise in the next 6 months within reason. It's also time to spot check your house. Walk around the outside of it, really inspect it. Take a notepad with you. It's very easy to make mental notes of things and forget them. If you're somebody that can hold mental notes in perfect order, that's great. The rest of us can't. So maybe take a good pad and pen around with you and take some notes. Really go over everything. You know, do you have any security holes? Is there any damage that's happened that's maybe on the side of the house that you never look at? Are there things you could improve? Do your pipes need wrapping? Better to do it now, before most of us are in deep winter weather, than when something really goes awry. And I know that for those of you that are living in colder climates, probably already do this, but for those of us that live in warmer climates where it's easy to forget, or even in people that live in colder climates, it's easy to put stuff off until it really becomes a problem. And pipes bursting really are not one of the problems you'd want to have. So maybe a good time when no one else is beating down the hardware stores, or great time to get out and dust off the foam insulators you have or anything else and really get out and put it in place. Whether you really need to right this second or not, better to do it now than, like I said, pipes bursting. And if you don't know how to take care of your pipes, I'm sure there's somebody standing at a hardware store that would be more than happy to explain it to you. Or go on to the forum, the In the Rabbit Hole forum, and ask for advice. A ton of people on there that would be happy to share their knowledge and experience. Another thing to look out for are branches or any other kind of vegetation that's grown up around your house that could possibly fall or otherwise damage your house in bad weather. Clear them away, or at least make plans within the next week or two to take care of that. If you live in an apartment, this doesn't mean that you don't have to do this. You take similar steps. Take a walk around. See if anything has changed. Obviously, if you're in an apartment complex, you're not the only person living there making changes to your housing environment. So you'll want to take a look around, see if maybe there's something wrong with something blocking fire exits, or maybe one of the fire alarms is busted somewhere. Make sure that nothing has cropped up in the last 6 months that could possibly hinder your survival. And if you've never done it before, just like we were saying before, just like I was saying before, great time to walk around and do it, at least for the first time. And whether you're a home or in an apartment, it's time to check those fire alarms and change the batteries. And even if you're in a home that has a wired-in fire alarm system, it's a great time to check it, make sure that it's all functioning correctly, and lucky you don't have to deal with changing batteries, but you do still have to actually check your system. It's also a good time to have someone come out and test your HVAC system, or for those of you that aren't familiar, your heating and AC system. Is everything in good working order? And it could also be a great opportunity to have somebody come in and really do a professional inspection and to say, hey, tell the guy before they come out, I want to follow you around and I want to see what you're doing. I'd like to learn. I'm probably going to ask you a bunch of questions. If that's going to be a problem, let me know now. And if it is a problem for them, then you need to find somebody else. Because that is a large part of survival, even, really checking our homes and checking on all these things and always learning. That is, the I in survival chi. One of the other things that comes to mind is, do you know where your pilot lights are? And if one of them was to go out, would you know how to relight them? And if you couldn't relight one, would you know how to shut the system off so that when it does come back on, the pilot light doesn't build up and cause issues for you? Then there's the hot water heater. Your hot water heater, as most of you should know, is also a place to store water. Although I would not count it as part of your preps, it is an advantage that exists. And over time, sediment can really build up in your hot water heater tank, and it diminishes the lifespan of your hot water heater, as well as reducing your available amount of water that you've got stored. For a lot of us that are in homes, that's 80 gallons worth of water. For people in apartments, that often ends up being 40 gallons worth of water. And for those of you that have heard, hey, a hot water heater is an emergency store of water, it might be a good time if you're in a new location to figure out if you have, I think the brand name is often referred to as an Insta hot water heater, but they're the hot water heaters that are heated by electricity, and they usually only hold about a gallon of water. So that might be a good thing to know, and you might as well check it and see if it's time to be serviced or anything like that. And for those that are completely uninitiated with the idea, why do you need to drain your hot water heater once a year? Well, like I said, sediment builds up. So what's going to happen is if you ever do actually have to use the water in that hot water heater, you're going to get a mouthful of sludge first, or a bucket full of sludge first. If it's a hot water heater that's a few years old and you've never drained it, or it's never been drained, then chances are good you've got at the very minimum a few inches of sediment. If you're in an area where the water is particularly hard, you can have quite a bit of sediment. And so this also follows along the same thing with having somebody come out and check your HVAC system. If you've never drained your hot water heater before, the best course of action is to have a plumber come out, show you how to do it, and show you everything you need to know about it, as well as checking to see and letting you know if you have a backflow valve or not. Backflow valves are these wonderful little valves that if negative pressure happens in the main because there's a water outage or any reason like that, it keeps the water in the tank from flowing back out of the tank, which if in an emergency you need that water, that would really kind of be unfortunate if that tank turned around and drained itself. And going back for just a second to checking the outside of your house, it's also a great time to check, make sure any security lights that you've put up or any kind of motion detectors or any of those fun toys, make sure they're all in good working order and that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. I know I just did this check on my house, and I've got at least 2 sets of motion lights that have to be completely replaced. That's not a 100% complete list, but it gets your mind churning because obviously I don't know what your house looks like, and I don't know what all you've got going on around your house or in your house, but these are some basics to get you started and get you thinking about walking around your house, really taking inventory, both inside and out, and really making sure that you're paying attention to what's going on with your home. Because your home, after all, is in an emergency situation going to be probably the most likely place that you are. And it is going to be your shelter, which is one of the main survival tenets of having shelter. And now that we've covered the basic shelter of your home and your bug-in location, let's talk about your bug-out vehicle. Now, some of the stuff will just be reminders for people that work on their own cars and trucks. But for those of us that don't, it's a list of questions for your mechanic or just a list of questions to ask yourself. Has your vehicle been making any kind of funny noises you've been ignoring? I know I can sometimes be really bad about that, and I know my girlfriend is absolutely horrible about it. But it's an easy thing to do because as soon as we start hearing a funny noise in our car, especially if we're not super familiar with or work on our own vehicles and don't know what it is, all we hear is dollar sign. All we hear is, man, what is, you hear it and it's like what goes through your head is, how much is that going to cost me? And it's, well, I've got Christmas gifts or Hanukkah gifts or whatever winter holiday suits you coming up, and I've got taxes coming up and all this other stuff, and I just don't even want to think about it or worry about it right now. Not the greatest of ideas, because that noise could be something very small that can be fixed very easily, very inexpensively now, or it can be something very small now that breaks, and as so often the case with anything mechanical, one little bitty cheap thing breaks and it ends up destroying something very, very expensive. So better to just go ahead and know what the problem is now and see if it can be fixed, or at least make plans for it to be fixed, rather than having it blow up in your face later, or worse, having it blow up in your face in an emergency situation, leaving you stranded somewhere. Along the same lines, what is that funny spot forming in the driveway? Do you know where it's coming from or what it is? This is another one that a lot of people are really bad about. They'll see, or sometimes they don't even see, that a funny little puddle of something that they're not really sure what it is forming under their car in the driveway. It's a good time to check underneath your car, see if there's anything forming that you should be aware of, and it's something else that either you need to fix or that your mechanic needs to fix. Take a look at it, at the very least. And along those same lines again is your vehicle due for service that you've been putting off? And again, I know this is like one of those times a year when everybody's really just, I don't want to spend another dime on another thing. But this really is something that regular service and maintenance is not something that should be put off. Your vehicle is not only shelter in some circumstances, it is what can be in some cases what you have to get away from danger. So don't put it off. Or at the very least, understand if there's any problems going on or what you really need to know. Don't ignore it. Don't put your head in the sand about it. Another thing, and for those of us in warmer climates, it's not something we usually have to deal with, but for those that are in cooler climates, you may need to change your motor oil to a heavier weight. That's definitely a question for your mechanic to know what kind and if it's necessary in your area. Another good one is, how are your antifreeze levels? Is that something you really need to be paying attention to? Do you know how to properly add antifreeze? I think as a kid, I kept ruining, I don't even remember what the name of the part is. Obviously, I'm not a car guy, but I kept ruining the pump in a Jeep of mine. And apparently, I was just pouring straight antifreeze into the cooling system. And apparently that is caustic and was ruining whatever the pump or part was that I was using. So it's good to not just look at something and say, oh, it's empty and I have fast, know what I'm doing with a vehicle, and just fill it back up. It is actually important, especially in instances like this where you're adding or removing fluids, to actually read the directions, or better yet, ask somebody that really knows what they're doing. Next thing to check would be your tires. Are they actually in good shape? Do you know about how long it'll be before you'll need to change those out? And another funny thing, as the temperature drops, so does the pressure levels, for reasons that are beyond the scope of this conversation, in your tires. So now is a great time, if you're somebody that doesn't do it regularly, now is a great time to check the pressure in your tires and see if they actually need to be pumped up a little bit. And if you are in an area that gets snow, did you check to make sure that your tire chains are actually where they're supposed to be? This is kind of like jumper cables, in that these are the kind of things that can very easily be taken out of a vehicle and then forgotten about, or somebody else takes them out of our vehicle to borrow them or do something and then doesn't bother to put them back. So it's a good time to check, and this would go along with checking your car bag, which we'll get to in just a bit. But admittedly, I've never had to deal with snow, so anything beyond that, I'm going to leave up to you, the listener, to take the responsibility to find out about. And if anybody really knows about dealing with snow and driving and vehicle maintenance in a much cooler climate than what I have to deal with, it would be really great if you could comment on the show with maybe a quick bulleted list of suggestions, or even if you want to write a long list of suggestions of things that people should be aware of when dealing with cooler climates. And here's one more. It's almost kind of out of left field, but I know this has happened to me on occasions, which is we have a bad habit to have a guy that takes care of something for us, and we assume that they'll let us know when something's wrong. Well, guess what? They don't always do that. Even a really good one. But usually the really good mechanics, the small shops, the guys that know you personally and really care about you, will actually tend to do some it's in their best interest to do it financially, but also caring about you as a customer, it's also in their best interest to do this. But to really have somebody that really knows what they're talking about and doing with your vehicle, to really go over it once and say, hey, is there anything that I really should know about that's seasonally appropriate? Or maybe there's just something you noticed and forgot to tell me about while you were working on my car, anything that maybe needs to be replaced soon, or that I should at least be aware of. Really ask them, and this, maybe if you're one of the bigger shops, they probably won't do this, but if you have a real relationship with your mechanic, they may go along with you asking, hey, do you mind if I watch you go over and do an inspection so that I know, and so that I have some understanding of what I'm looking at and what I'm looking for when I'm just kind of checking out my own vehicle. In one of the episodes we did on survival bags, we mentioned that Jonathan and I both keep fobs and car bags. My car bag is actually bigger than my bob, basically because I drive a Tahoe and I've got plenty of extra room to have basically as big of a kit as I want in there. The idea behind it is that I don't want to have to drag a bob around with me everywhere. So, kind of like a squirrel with nuts all over the place, that's what I've done. I've put bags everywhere. And I really like the idea of having two bags, much more than I like the idea of just having one bag. But just like your bob, all the same pointers apply. It's time to go through it. Dump it out if you have to. Check everything. Make sure everything is in appropriate working order. Remove the things that maybe you now find unnecessary, again, because your skills have broadened or improved. And add things that now, based on new information that you've had because you've been in prep for however long, now there may be things that you've thought of. So add those things in. And also, do you have some kind of emergency sleeping bag in your kit to keep you warm if you do get stranded? And do you have extra ones for all of the passengers that your vehicle can hold? It's easy to think of ourselves when we're building these bags, but often we're not the only one in our vehicle when we get stranded. And if at the worst case, you've got a few extras in case something happens to one of these pieces of kit. Also, do you have a backup way to charge your cell phone? I know I actually did put out a post last week was 7 items for your car bag. And one of those items was they're these really neat Morphe backup batteries. And I'll link to last week's Friday Gear Report with those 7 items. But it's a really cool little device, and it's much smaller than a Juice Orange. It's actually a little bit smaller than most cell phones. And it gives you about 2 full charges at least for an iPhone. They're not cheap. They're range in price from about $50 to $70, depending on where you look. The best price I've seen so far was at Best Buy. But even going beyond that, do you have a spare cell phone charging cable in your vehicle? Because it's kind of like jumper cables and snow chains and everything else. It's easy for things to get removed from a vehicle, forgotten about, borrowed, or even worse, damaged and no longer operable. And let's face it, cell phone charging cables just aren't that expensive for something that, while you could very well survive without, cell phones are a really great invention, super convenient, and one of the fastest ways to get our own butts out of a bad situation is to actually call somebody else that's not in a bad situation to come get us or to help us out in some way. And just like your Bob, make sure that if there's any clothing in that bag, which I would recommend, that clothing is seasonally appropriate. Now, there is wisdom in those that say your bag should go with you into your vehicle when you leave your house, and it should go with you into work when you go into work, and it should come back out of work and go into your vehicle and go into your house and so on and so forth. And I don't disagree with those people, and I don't disagree with anybody that does that. I think if that works for you, that's a great way to do it. For me personally, I don't like doing it. I did it for a while. I found it very annoying. I found it very bulky. I have enough crap to carry around in a day. And to carry around a legitimate Bob, in my opinion, it's just too much for most of us, that, especially if you work in an office environment. So personally, like I mentioned earlier, I like to keep several bags. And if nothing goes wrong, I look at these bags as they're supplemental to one another, and they provide a complete and redundant system. And in reality, I actually have more than just 2 bags. I have a bug-out bag at home. I have a supplemental Bob in my truck. I have a vehicle kit with all the jumper cables and all that other fun stuff. And then I have a whole nother kit in my office, along with finally my EDC bag that doubles as my work bag that I carry around every day, that has the absolute bare bones. If I couldn't get to any of my other bags, this is what I would need. And yes, I would do the same thing to every single one of these bags every 6 months, which is to dump everything out, inspect them, add or remove. And as long as we're talking about the wintertime and prepping for cooler weather, in every bag I have a wool beanie, an extra pair of wool socks, and a pair of good gloves in every single one of those bags, even in my EDC bag. They're just not that bulky, and at least for me, these are the extremities that I find get the coldest. For you, it may be different, but to me, those are the bare bones winter's essentials that if I was stuck out in the cold, I'd at least want my feet, hands, and head protected. And this is by no means a complete list of everything that you should be doing for your winter prep. But it should be enough to get your mind in the right place and you thinking along the right lines and on the right track, and really thinking about, you know what? It's the onset of winter. I know for some of you, you're already in full-blown winter, but in general, for all of us, it's that 6-month mark where you should stop, take stock of all of your preps, see what's going on, make sure everything works, and look for holes, and look for ways to improve. And with that, you've got your winter homework assignment, and it wraps up episode 92. Thank you for joining us. In the Rabbit Hole isn't just a podcast and a blog. It's also a community. The best way to connect to that community is by joining me and the other rabbit holers on the In the Rabbit Hole forum at forum.intherabbithole.com. Remember, survival chi starts with community. So come join me at forum.intherabbithole.com and let's talk about all things preparedness. Help us bring you better information about preparedness. If you have an author, blogger, podcaster, video blogger, or any other person you'd like to hear on the show, we'd love to have them on. Contact the person you'd like to hear on the show and tell them about In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. Tell them to visit intherabbithole.com/guest. Don't wait. Do it today, and let's grow the show together. Get weekly updates about articles, episodes, and special In the Rabbit Hole announcements every Saturday morning by signing up for the newsletter through the website, intherabbithole.com. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.